evening, everyone. Welcome to the second session of the Criminal Justice Advisory Group. My name is Akinyanju, and I am your host tonight. We have two eminent speakers tonight, whom I'll be introducing in a moment. Before I do that, I just want to spend a minute or two speaking about why we are here tonight. So, the Criminal Justice Advisory Group, CJAG, is a loose network of professionals and students of criminal law who share my passion for improving and modernizing the criminal justice system in Nigeria. What I'm trying to achieve is not new, but I think for all we have witnessed this year, I believe it is necessary that we are able to participate individually and jointly to improve standards and develop a justice system that is fit for 21st century Nigeria. For my part, I'm a lawyer qualified to practice in Nigeria and in England and Wales, and I bring to the table my 30 years experience of working in Her Majesty's courts and tribunal service. So if I may just go on to introduce my first speaker. The first speaker is Adegbola Adeniro, Commissioner for Justice and Attorney General, Ogun State, Nigeria. Prior to joining the team of the Governor, Prince Dapo Abiodun, Mr. Adeniro served as a tracking team leader at the United Nations International Residual Mechanism for Criminal Tribunals, where he conducted an international effort to locate and apprehend genocide fugitives. Before this, he served as the pioneer rule of law advisor to Professor Yemi Oshibajo, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, and of course now the Vice President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Mr. Adeniro has previously served as a Senior Special Assistant to the Governor of Lagos State on legal matters, where he was instrumental in setting up the Lagos Domestic and Sexual Violence Response Team. He has also worked as an investigator and trial lawyer at the International Criminal Court in The Hague, where he investigated some of the world's most dangerous international crime suspects. Adegbola Adeniro holds a Bachelor of Laws degree from the University of Lagos and a Master of Laws degree from the Harvard Law School. Over to you, Mr. Bola Adeniro. Thank you.
Usually specified. Then there's always ongoing capacity building. The world is always evolving, and we need to keep a pace with it. And so that's something that we have been doing for some time as well. And we try to develop guidelines to help streamline responses. And of course, in management of resources, we need to understand that there's always a limit to the resources that are available. So partnerships are advisable. And information management, I'll talk about the Criminal Records Registry, which is a new thing that is now forming in Nigeria. Budgeting is a major issue. Initial contact with survivors, usually either at the police station or at a hospital. And so that's very critical. At the police station, we're starting to see what we call family support units developing, where experts within the police or the expertise in responding to sexual and gender-based violence, where it's now congregating. We encourage the police also to refer victims or survivors to other agencies that are able to provide services. There's a victim witness protection, which is very, very critical, confidentiality issues. And then when we now get to the preliminary investigation part, there's crime scene processing, witness interviews, the forensic head-to-toe medical examination Of course, we have to look at the real evidence, other forensics, suspect interviews, and so on. And then we now get to the prosecution proper, the remand, if necessary, legal advice, the charging, trial, and appeal. And so in one breath, almost everything I've mentioned here will go into a typical sexual violence prosecution. And so it's important to talk about challenges. One is we need to understand that there have been many unreported cases of sexual violence. And so perpetrators basically believe that they can get away with it. And so oftentimes when there's always the expectation that nothing will come of a sexual violence prosecution. And that's even if you get to the point of filing a case in court. And so victims are also discouraged from pursuing justice by the institution set up to protect them. So for example, if you go to a police station and the first thing the police officer is asking you is, well, why were you dressed like that? Or why did you go to that particular location? I mean, that victim is not going to be encouraged to pursue this. And the society at large, I mean, we have many judgmental people in society, and so they're always questioning why a lady dressed in a certain way rather than focusing on the behavior of the perpetrator. Then there's lack of capacity to properly investigate. I've encountered this in Abuja, in Lagos, in Ogun State, where I am right now. You see that there are many instances where there are low-hanging fruits that many people can see, but which is just not, collected during investigation. And then there's lack of effective coordination across agencies. This is very important because the police is, as an institution, they're not equipped to deal with this on their own. So for example, if you have a case of domestic violence where you have to remove the victim from the place where he or she is being abused, but you have nowhere to essentially take the victim to. And so issues of shelter, issues of also referring them for medical and psychosocial support are not always readily available. So these are challenges that the police face. Then, of course, I've talked a bit about the insensitive reactions of many stakeholders. Also, lack of readily available or accessible medical and psychosocial support. This remains a problem because oftentimes victims have to pay for these services, but they cannot afford to pay for them. And failure to protect victim witnesses who appear to give evidence in court. And this, so it's not only from physical attack, but it's also from, families of the perpetrator approaching the victim to settle the case out of court and avoid prosecution and being tempted with all sorts of things, sometimes being threatened. And then poor awareness of violence against persons prohibition law, which was enacted in 2017 and has come to at least address some of these shortcomings. Then we have other systemic challenges, slow pace of justice generally. It's not the fault of any particular institution, but collectively, justice is slow. Stigmatization is another one, and this prevents a lot of victims from reporting cases of sexual violence. It's remarkable when I talk to a lot of my female friends. I mean, almost 1 in 3 or 1 in 4 will tell me about some molestation that happened when they were much younger. And so this is actually something which is very rampant. I've talked about poor human capacity, and then the non-victim focused approach. And I will dwell on this just for a bit. Why is it so important to focus on the victim? And the main reason is because the victim is the best witness to the crime that has occurred. And so if you're even talking about corroboration, is corroboration of the testimony of that particular victim. And so the victim is not in the physical or mental state of mind to to give evidence, then you might be losing a significant portion of what you could present in court. And it goes in many, there are many, iterations of this. For example, it is also the victim that will tell you through their statement where to find additional evidence. And if you don't get that, then you won't be able to effectively investigate the case. So why not focus on the victim to make sure that the victim is in the best possible state of mind to provide useful information to guide the investigation. So some stats. I currently have in my ministry 137 sexual and gender-based violence cases. This is out of a total of 1,340 criminal cases across the state. We have only 34 state council. I've looked at how long it takes us to conclude criminal cases. It's 3 years on average from the moment it's filed in court. And so you can imagine from the moment the crime occurs, because there's also the police investigation period. So it's much longer than 3 years. We have one police family support unit in Otta, which was just recently commissioned, and one privately run sexual assault referral center. We'll talk a bit more about that. And out of 29 sexual assault referral centers in 17 states across Nigeria. So what are we doing as a state? I think the first thing is, so there have been a lot of ad hoc responses, prior to there being a systemic or strategic response. So for example, during the lockdown, we set up an emergency team to respond to cases of sexual and gender-based violence. And this was composed of Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Women Affairs and Social Development, the Spring Center, which is a sexual assault referral center, and one NGO called OFFENCES, and then of course in collaboration with the police. So this was set up, it was just ad hoc, just to respond at the time to the spike in the reporting of cases that we experienced at the time. But since then, especially in May 2020, we constituted the Violence Against Persons Management Committee, which is one of the committees set up under the new Violence Against Persons Prohibition Law. And this is a multi-agency partnership to provide systemic response to sexual and gender-based violence. Again, if you look at what I said earlier about the many types of services that a victim requires in order to be in the proper state of mind. So the committee, if you like, is like a coordinating body that ensures that all the relevant stakeholders play their part in ensuring that we effectively tackle sexual and gender-based violence. So it is set up to address shortcomings, coordination of social support, healthcare, legal, and law enforcement responses to sexual and gender-based violence. If you look at some of their functions under the law establishing them, so effective implementation of the law itself, developing, monitoring, and reporting on the implementation of the state action plan for tackling violence against persons, proposing and promoting strategies and guidelines for preventing and combating gender-based violence, liaising with government agencies, managing violence against persons support fund, which is again one of the things set up under the law, and then conducting research on national, international, and regional developments and standards and dealing with matters of violence against persons. So they have broad functions, but the main thing really is coordinating the response to sexual and gender-based violence. And then the membership, so it's chaired by Excellency the First Lady of Ogun State. The Vice Chairperson is the Commissioner for Women Affairs. And then you have membership drawn from the judiciary. There's a magistrate who's a member. From the State House of Assembly, there's one of the honorable members there. Ministry of Justice, the Director of Citizens' Rights, represents justice on the committee. There's Ministry of Health, Education, Science and Technology, local government agency, there's the police, Ministry of Women Affairs. In fact, the secretary is from the Ministry of Women Affairs, and then 4 civil society organizations. And what they've been doing since they were set up, the first thing, of course, was because they needed to be informed by a strategic plan. They are set out to develop a state action plan, as the law also mandates them to do. And this, because you can imagine they were set up in May this year without proper budgeting. So part of the state action plan now requires that there will be a proper budget for them next year. So they'll be far more active in 2021. But now all the activities are basically gone into budget consideration for 2021. And so the 5 pillars that the state action plan is that are built on: enforcement and implementation of existing legal and policy instruments. There are already a lot of laws and policies out there that just ignore. So one of the first things really is for them to ensure that the institutions that are meant to enforce and implement are doing precisely that. And then public awareness on the ills of violence against persons. This is to raise public awareness. So they've done like walks against violence against persons, again, just to be present on people's minds and to speak up against violence against persons. Then effective protection, care, and treatment. So they're looking at many aspects here. So from the protection of victims and witnesses to the medical and psychosocial treatment. All the agencies or stakeholders are responsible for this. Again, the coordination will be done by them. And strengthening multi-sectoral coordination and mechanisms. Again, this is to ensure that all the different players, and you can see the membership of the committee itself, it's almost like a then, of course, it then goes into the broader agencies that they represent. And of course, progress tracking. One of the things that we made a big deal of is to ensure that there's continuous monitoring and evaluation so that we can see whether the intervention of the management committee is positive or not. So some of the things that we've been doing is that we're designing the template for documents to capture some of their work so that we can generate indicators to monitor their progress. Then the activities also, one of the activities I was actually mandated by the committee to go to all area commands of the police. So there are 10 area commands of the police in the state. And I did that between the 18th of September and 13th of November, speaking with all the divisional police officers. So if you know the way the police is organized, there's a state command, there's the area command, and then there's the divisional command, which is your typical police station. So at the area commands, we asked the divisional police officers responsible for that area to be present. So in this training, we covered every single police station in Ogun State. And so the idea was to, one, encourage them to establish and run family support units. And a family support unit, like I said, is a unit within the police where they get experts within the police co-locating with some psychosocial experts as well, who, for example, if you're interviewing a child, can be present, can also check to see that the child is ready to be interviewed, is in psychological state of mind for that, is not going to be re-traumatized, and during the interview, they can monitor the progress of the child, and so on and so forth. And so, of course, these units will be child-friendly, will be very comfortable for whoever is being taken care of there. And so we have just one of them right now in the Ota Area Command, and that was just commissioned last month. And so that's one of the areas that we're encouraging them. And since the training, we've seen at least 2 area commands show interest in establishing a family support unit as well. So we will be having more hopefully next year. Then we focused on the investigation of sexual and gender-based violence from an investigator's perspective and from a prosecutor perspective. So the area commander, OTA, ATP Monde Agbonika, who is very experienced at this, was one who facilitated the first part, the investigation of STBB from the investigator's perspective. And then I took the second one from the prosecutor perspective. And so in my presentation, I talked about the value of maintaining a proper criminal records registry for suspects and convicts. And one of the reasons for that is because we have so many failed cases. But then once you properly log suspects, their records remain in the police system so that when you call, I mean, if someone, the suspect is a repeat suspect, you might be able to generate intelligence or leads that will help you the second time around to investigate the case much better. We talked a lot about corroborating evidence because that's an area that was not so clear to them. When corroboration is required as a matter of law, when it's required as a matter of practice, what types of corroborating evidence are available to them. And we focus also on alternatives to confessional statements. In this part of the world, we like confessional statements, but we prosecutors always discourage them because we tell them that they actually pose more of a problem to us during prosecution than the solution. So we always ask for the alternatives to confessional statements. So we focused a lot on that. Then I looked at the laws on sexual and gender-based violence, and these are some of them. The criminal code law is an old one and is, in my opinion, is quite archaic because it has all sorts of complicated provisions depending on the age of the victim, which I think is simply unnecessary. The child's rights law is a very good one because when the victim is under 18, we do not have to show consent. We don't have to prove consent, in many instances. So that allows, because when I told the police that, look, all you need to do or establish in that case is that sexual intercourse occurred and that the victim is under 18. You don't have to show consent. They were surprised. But it's because, they were charging under the wrong law. Again, the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Law, that has changed the definition of rape. So under the Criminal Code Law, rape is unlawful carnal knowledge by a man of a woman, which is done only through penetration of the vagina, full stop. But under the new law, rape can be committed by a man or a woman. It is the penetration of the mouth, the anus or the vagina, and it can be by any instrument. So it doesn't necessarily have to be by the penis, it can be by a pencil, any instrument, by your fingers and so on. So the new law has completely, again, changed the definition of rape. And then it's, the new law also introduces protective orders, has made it very easy for victims to obtain those protective orders. You don't even need a lawyer in order to approach a judge or a magistrate to get them. And then, of course, it created the Violence Against Persons Management Committee. Sorry, we're having a power cut here, but I'm sure you can still see the presentation. Then the activities continued. So we commissioned, like I said, the first family support unit on the 10th of November. The unit it was funded by private individuals and the state, and it's to provide a safe and conducive environment for victims to report cases of abuse to the police. And then the officers assigned to the unit, of course, are specially trained to interact with victims, to investigate cases, to refer victims to other support services, support service providers, and to ensure the protection of victims. We are having a training in collaboration with Lawyers Without Borders in New York on the 9th and 10th of December for prosecutors in the Ministry of Justice. And what we specified to them is that we would like the training to focus on how our prosecutors can be more victim-focused, during prosecution. So how they can be better at ensuring that victims are properly interviewed, preparing victims for court, examining victims themselves, and protecting the victim during cross-examination. For example, there's a provision in our Evidence Act that says that one should not question the victim about sexual activities in relation to other partners. So it does not matter the sexual history of the victim as long as it's not with the accused person or defendant. And when someone is trying to show that, okay, maybe the particular defendant or the victim in this case is a prostitute, that because it's a prostitute, the person is maybe the person is lying about the rape incident, it's completely irrelevant. And so we'll be talking a lot about how to protect victims during cross-examination at that training. Then 2 members of the Violence Against Persons Management Committee, also on the same days, 9th and 10th of December, will be participating at the 6th Conference on Sexual Assault Referral Centers Network, organized by the British Council. And this is a forum that allows for sharing of best practices and networking to enhance the capacities of sexual assault referral centers. Like I said earlier, we have only one sexual assault referral center in Ogun State, and that one is privately run by an NGO. We're in the process, and that's the Health Ministry, and that's why we have a second member attending this particular conference. So we're in the process of setting one up, which will be government run and which will be in the OUT, that's Olabisi Onabanjo University Teaching Hospital. So hopefully by early next year, we should have a second sexual assault referral center. Then other activities of the Ministry of Justice. On the 11th of September, I was sworn in as the chairperson of the Task Force on Human Trafficking. And the reason why, maybe I should focus on the reason why this is important. There is a link between sexual and gender-based violence and trafficking. And when you look at the element of human trafficking, the act remains the purpose, and especially when it's the purpose aspect of it, it's usually exploitation of some sort, either in the form of prostitution, sexual exploitation, forced labor, and so on. So there are a lot of sexual and gender-based offenses that occur as part of trafficking. So the link is something which is completely salient. And on this task force, we've also developed an action plan that focuses on several areas. Again, how to increase publicity, how to provide legal services support to victims and ensure proper prosecution, availability for emergency response, how to empower victims, medical, psychosocial support, shelter, monitoring and evaluation, victim protection. And then the intelligence and data sharing is where we want to focus on interagency cooperation. 10 members of the task force have since been trained by the International Organization of Migration and NAPTIP. NAPTIP is the Nigerian agency responsible for trafficking. And there is actually one, of course, I can't talk about it, but one ongoing operation, which is a joint NAPTIP and police operation that I'm personally supervising. Then other activities on the 13th of August, I introduced Justice Clock, which is an electronic platform for managing and tracking prosecution case files. Again, you have to remember that there are 1,340 cases. There is no way I can monitor 1,340 cases in the ministry. So what I do is to have a platform like this, which will help me filter so that I can prioritize. For example, if I need to know about the sexual and gender-based violence cases that we have, and to see how long they're taking and whether there's a delay and where I need to intervene, I'll easily be able to go on the platform to identify those cases. I can see where there's delay quite easily. In fact, it will red flag those issues for me so that I can quickly ask counsel to bring up those files. And then one of the things we've been doing, of course, because it's an electronic platform that was not specifically designed for us, we've been doing a lot of tweaking and upgrading in order to ensure that it meets our requirements. And this is still even ongoing to date. And then, of course, we're uploading the backlog of cases that we complete database. But it's been useful so far, and that's something I encourage others to look into. Then the governor has also committed to the acquisition of forensic equipment for extraction of digital evidence and matching of fingerprints. Now, when I talked about the criminal records registry earlier, it's important to understand that the federal government has already deployed fingerprint collection equipment in all the area commands in Ogun State. So what we are looking at in terms of the matching is to see if first of all, if the software that accompanies the equipment, if the software will allow for, oh, thank God, the software will allow for single digits. So, scrappy fingerprints that you find, on surfaces, automatic with the 10 digits that would have been captured in the database. And so that's one of the things we're working on. So if we need to enhance the software that they have, because they already have the hardware, then we can do that. We've already asked the Commissioner of Police to nominate one officer, and he's done so, who will be the focal person on forensics. And he's already gone on a 3-day training organized by the German NGO GIZ between 19th and 21st of November. And this is because, like I said, we're gearing towards having alternatives to witness evidence or confessional statements, and part of it is forensics. So, and again, forensics is a very broad field. Many times we want to focus on all aspects of forensics at the same time. But we said we need to be very methodical and very practical. And so where we believe we can get the greatest value in the shortest possible time are these two areas, digital evidence and fingerprints. And then, of course, the Chief Judge of the state has also announced that she will set up a sexual offense court or designate a sexual offenses judge, depending on the volume and distribution of cases. And this is something that she's done on the platform of the Administration of Criminal Justice Monitoring Committee, which she chairs and I co-chair. And we've taken issues of sexual and gender-based violence to the committee, so the committee also can sit down to assess what solutions should be provided in the area. So I think that's it. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Thank you for listening.
Thank you so much. And I must say, right on time, right on the button. I mean, there is so much activity going on in Ogun State, just on the addressing sexual offenses. I wonder how you are able to deal with other matters as Attorney General. But I must say it is hugely impressive. There were a lot of things that caught my eye that I thought, wow, yes, this is something that I know goes on in the UK, you know, various initiatives, and to hear that they are actually being implemented in Ogun State is quite good to hear. I think I'm most impressed by the Violence Against Persons Management Committee, and you say that there is continuous monitoring and evaluation. And I'm sure that there'll be many questions and comments. I think what I would ask, so that we are able to manage them, is if people type the questions on the chat facility, then I'll be able to put the questions on to Mr. Deniro, and we'll be able to take as many questions as possible.
The second speaker tonight is Funke Adeoye. Funke is a lawyer and human rights defender with years of experience in criminal and human rights litigation, policy development, and justice reforms. Ms. Adeoye is a graduate of law from the University of Benin, and she was called to the Nigerian bar in 2013. She has successfully represented several indigent pretrial inmates pro bono, from the lowest courts to the appellate courts. She worked as an associate in the law firm of Olumide Shofoora, Senior Advocate of Nigeria, in Lagos, where she honed her litigation and defense skills, having been exposed to several high-profile criminal cases. Funke is a fellow of Cornell University Center on Death Penalty Worldwide, and she is the founder of Hope Behind Bars Africa, an organization which leverages technology to provide access to justice to indigent and marginalized inmates, whilst advocating for criminal justice reforms. Working in 8 custodial centers in Nigeria, her organization has provided access to justice to over 100 pretrial detainees. Her work has earned her numerous recognitions and awards, including being a finalist of the Future Africa Award for Advocacy 219. This was an award referred to by Bill Gates as Africa's Forbes. Funke further extends her management skills with Global Rights, which is an international human rights and governance organization, as its programs manager, where she leads a diverse team on several human rights projects. In her spare time, she volunteers as a capital defense lawyer for the Bureau of International Law and Narcotics, which is a sponsored program in Nigeria, and also the World Justice Project Index, where she serves as a contributory expert. She is a member of the International Federation of Women Lawyers, the Nigerian Bar Association, and a finalist at the Barack Obama instituted Mandela Washington Fellowship. In 2021, Funke Adeoye will be representing Africa as a One Young World Forum delegate with the support of the European Union. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir, for inviting me to this meeting at this time. It's a very necessary conversation we're having. And I want to say a very big thank you to the Honorable Attorney General of Ogun State for going ahead of me to actually put a lot of work into some of the things I'm going to be saying, and also for the awesome work that is being done in Ogun State. I think if many of the states replicate what is happening in Ogun State and in Lagos State as it pertains to criminal justice generally, many of the challenges we would be discussing this evening would not, we would be able to overcome many of the challenges. So like the Attorney General has done lots of work around prosecution of sexual offenses in Nigeria. I'm going to be speaking from a defense counsel's perspective, the perspective of the client, what is prevalent across Nigeria. And I would also be sharing some of the challenges we faced on the field. Can you see my screen? Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay. So I'll just go right into it because I don't have so much time. Yeah, so I stumbled on this statistic sometime ago, and it's something that really strikes me, in the sense that many people might not believe Nigeria is supposed to be on this list, but then when you're on the field and you see what is happening, you listen to the news, you find out that while sexual offenses, or while sexual and gender-based offenses is not only it doesn't only apply to women. Women in Nigeria actually have more stories to tell when it comes to sexual and gender-based violence. And in very recent times, we've heard several stories or in the news of people who were affected by this issue. And it's important that we start on these notes to realize how urgent these issues we are discussing today is. The Attorney General had mentioned some of these already, the laws that govern sexual offenses in Nigeria, and I just want to throw a little light on some of the ones that were not referred to. So the Constitution of Nigeria, by virtue of Section 34, says that everyone has a right to dignity of his person, and so when someone is sexually violated, Section 34 comes to play. But then there is another section in the Constitution, Section 29, that deals with the age of marriage, and it says that the age of the adult age is actually 18, but then a lady who is married does not fall under this age. Now, this is very important for me because there was a time I was in court earlier this year. I was representing a client. She was married at 13, and she was married in the north. I reside in the northern part of Nigeria, and she was married at 13 against her will. And somehow along the line, she had a domestic issue with the first wife, a domestic issue that led to the death of her stepchild. Now, she did not kill her stepchild, but somehow her stepchild had died. And so she's been in prison for over 3 years. She's been in prison awaiting trial for over 3 years for murder. And when she was taken to prison, she was about 16 years old. First of all, one of the things we noticed was the police had gone ahead to change her age when she was arrested and when she was made to write a confessional statement. So one of the days I was in court, we were having informal discussions with the court, and I mentioned this vital fact to the court. The court had just granted her bail after 3 years of awaiting trial, and I mentioned this vital fact to the court, the fact that she was a child bride, and the court said as long as she is married, it doesn't matter how old she is. And I never really understood the import of Section 29 of the Constitution until the court said that. I was before a High Court judge when he said this. So for me, it's very constructive and instructive for our conversation this evening. I'll come back to that later. So yeah, the criminal code and the penal code, like the Honorable AG has mentioned, they all provide for legislations relating to sexual offenses, even though they are not quite adequate. We also have the criminal laws of various states. We have the Cybercrime Act. By virtue of Section 23 of the Cybercrime Act, child pornography is prohibited, and anyone who violates that has to go to prison or pay a certain amount of fine. Then we also have the Violence Against Persons Prohibition Act, which we'll be talking about in a bit, the Child Rights Act, and other international frameworks like the African, the AFCHR, and other international frameworks. So a lot has been said about the VAP Act already. The VAP Act expands the definition of rape as against the Criminal Code Act and the Penal Code Act that is limited. It expands the definition of rape to include both men and women, and it also allows for spousal rape. Under the Penal Code in the North, which applies in the North, a man cannot rape his wife, but under the VAP Act, spousal rape is recognized. Now, the VAP Act is one very ingenious and innovative law that any nation that is moved, that is forward-looking, would find the need to actually have an act of this nature. And so many times, I often wonder why, out of the 36 states, 35 states in Nigeria, of course, it's been domesticated in the FCT. We only have 14 states that have domesticated these acts, and implementation has been slow in some of these states. Recently, I'm going to get to that, but then recently, during the lockdown, we had so many cases of sexual and gender-based violence, and sometime in June, the 36 governors of various states met, and they actually declared a state of emergency on violence against sexual and gender-based violence. And one of the major crux for declaring the state of emergency was that those states that were yet to domesticate the act will go back and domesticate the act. But it's been 6 months now, and that has not been done. And so for me, I think that is the whole idea of speaking here, of having this conversation, is to look to actions that we should take as a group and major points to note as a group. So for me, it's instructive that all the governors agree that this is a major issue, but then they're still finding it hard to domesticate the act or get the legislation to their various House of Assemblies to domesticate the act. So yeah, the Child Rights Act. So for me, like I mentioned, the Constitution absolves child marriage by virtue of of Section 29, but then the Child Rights Act remedied it by prohibiting child marriage. Only 25 states have domesticated the Child Rights Act, and early marriage is still largely prevalent in the North. Where the story I mentioned earlier happened in Nasarawa State, and Nasarawa State is a state that is very close to the FCT. It's not a state in the core North, so you would expect that a state that is not in the core North would be more acceptable of the understanding that a child cannot be married. But then, I know one of the things that it really got to me that day when I got home and I thought about it, that we still have a long way to go. I understand that there is a religious angle to all of this, but then we cannot be a country that we have agreed that we're not a religious country, right? So it's important that we spell out what we really are and not going back and forth on all these issues. Yeah, so I had mentioned this earlier, and one of the reasons why we have a recurrent violence against women is because of victim shaming and victimization. People are still scared to tell their stories, because when they tell their stories, they will be shamed. And then the laws governing sexual and domestic and gender-based violence, is still shrouded in secrecy, because we are having these discussions because we're professional people. But then this issue we're talking about, it happens to the average person on the street. It happens to the average woman on the street. It happens to people that do not even know what a legislation is. And the question is, do they know that it is possible that there are, for instance, referral centers that you can go to if you're being abused by your husband? How aware are they of these issues? What are organizations doing? What are even the states doing to help people become aware, of what the law says? And that's where we look at issues of implementation. And this, for me, opens door to a lot of challenges. Now, I interface with the criminal justice system by virtue of my work, and by the criminal justice system, I refer largely to the police, the courts, and the prison system. But then we find that we actually also have a culture that sort of permits sexual and gender-based violence. Sometime last year, many CSOs, including my organization, carried out a demonstration against policemen assaulting women while in detention. So I think they had raided certain women who they regarded as prostitutes, and they are taking them to the police station in Abuja here, right here in Abuja. And we formed reports, confirmed reports showed that some of these women were raped. Some of them were raped with pure water. There's this pure water sachet as condoms, and then, everyone there was a loud outcry, and then we had to do like a form of street protest and all of that. Now those are the kind of things we see. And so we're saying that if these kind of things are prevalent in the Federal Capital Territory, what is happening in other places? And then of course there is the societal culture of always blaming the woman for what she's wearing, blaming her for not speaking up. And when she eventually does speak up, she's told that, oh, don't you have shame and all of that. So, we face all of those challenges, and it actually debars women from speaking up when they should speak up. Yeah, so talking about the criminal justice system, now I work largely, like I mentioned, I interface largely with the criminal justice system. And at the last count, we had about 70% of people behind bars who are awaiting trial. And for me, this is very related to what we're discussing today, because there is a slow pace of justice. There's slow pace of justice. So you are advising a client, for instance, to seek justice after going through, sexual violation and all of that. And then the person is wondering, when would I get justice? How long will it take me to get justice? And then considering how specific these issues are, the fact that medical evidence needs to be preserved and all of that, you wonder if your clients would really get justice. And when you consider the fact that the police largely has the power to investigate, NAPTIP, that's the commission in charge of prohibition of trafficking against persons, also prosecutes, but then police does most of the work. And in recent times, we all saw what's been happening with the SARS, and there is a large distrust for the police out there. So I, as a young person, when I come in contact with a policeman, I am not supposed to be scared. But then every time I have to interface with a policeman, every time I have to go possibly release a client, maybe on bail for a very simple offense, I know that it's going to be argumentative, and then it's going to be confrontative, very confrontative. Except times where, okay, you just ask, you want to go straight to see the DPO, but then once you introduce yourself as a lawyer, it looks like you've come to fight them. And, that's one of the reasons why we have like a large distrust. People largely distrust the police. And then in very recent times, there's just, with the whole NSAS protest and how the government has handled it, labeling peaceful protesters, prescribing them as terrorists. That's how many of us see and choose to see it. With all of that, there is a large distrust for the police. Another reason why that is the case is because in this part of the world, people who go to police are the ones that actually prosecute their cases. So I have clients who are in prison because they were not able to bribe a policeman to continue their case. I have clients who committed offenses, but they are going to get out because the policemen know nobody is going to sponsor the prosecution. So I have a client who actually killed someone out of self-defense, and he's going to be out of jail in a few months' time. Why? Because the parents of the deceased are not ready to prosecute. They have tried getting some of funds from my clients who doesn't have, and they just stopped coming to court. So we've been going to courts. Well, due to COVID-19, we couldn't go to courts for about 4 months, but for every time we went to court this year, the police failed to show up. He was arrested last year, and by holding charge, he was imprisoned. And no charge has been brought against him, nothing, even though they claim they have, a file against him, and we haven't seen them in court. So that's the kind of thing we find. So the question is, how many people who have been sexually violated, how many people who have all of these issues would have the money to sponsor prosecution of their cases? So that's a major question. I as much as possible, didn't want to talk about too many challenges. The Honorable AG has done quite a lot around that, but I wanted to talk about recommendations. I know that in some other climes we have closed courts, in the sense that we for the sake of to avoid victim shaming, to avoid the situation whereby people don't want to speak up because they are scared of victimization, we can actually have closed trial, for people who have been sexually violated, and also it also helps to aid a victim-based approach in the sense that you're putting the victim at the forefront of the matter. Then the definition of the offense, the VAP has done a good work around this, but then many of the states, like I mentioned, 23 of the states are yet to domesticate the act. So I think this is something that we have to pursue. The penal code, the criminal code, the definition of the offense needs to be reviewed in these legislations. Then there is also a need to domesticate the VAP and the Child Rights Act across all states. A lot of CSOs are doing good work around this, but then there is a need to do more. And this is not the work of the executive alone. It's actually to get the legislators in these states, to see the need to do this at this time. I understand, like I mentioned earlier, the religious issues around this, but then they don't have to fake all of the issues hook, line, and sinker. But I think that if the 36 governors, for instance, have come together and they've said that violence, the sexual and gender-based violence, it's a matter that requires urgency. It's an emergency issue at this time, and there should be no reason why the VAP Act should not be domesticated. I think the criminal justice system, the police, the courts, and the prison needs more funding. But then there's a need to demand for accountability and transparency in the system. Year in, year out, lots of money goes into funding the criminal justice system. Lots of trainings are being done for the police, but then we're not seeing much of the benefit. So even before, and here I really do think there's a need for more funding. I saw while the AG was speaking, the number of prosecutors that handle cases in Ogun State, it's like 1 to say 15, 20 cases. Here in Abuja, what we have is one prosecutor might be handling a case for about 4 or 5 area courts in a particular region. It's really one of the reasons why we have slow pace of justice. And slow pace of justice does not affect, it affects everything, like sexual and gender-based issues and also every other crime out there. And it's slow pace of justice that actually leads to prison congestion, and that's another issue entirely. Then there's a need to build the capacity of prosecutors, defense lawyers, and other stakeholders as it concerns sexual and gender-based violence and offenses, basically, because you do not expect someone who does not have thorough knowledge of these issues to actually prosecute these issues or to actually defend. And in Nigeria, what we have is a proliferation of professionals. One lawyer is handling commercial cases, criminal cases, land cases, and all of that. And so many times, for some of the cases I actually handle, I find that at the initial stage, it wasn't like these people didn't have lawyers, but then these people are indigent people. They had saved up all their money, paid a lawyer who just toyed with their cases, and then disappeared. And what they have is they have to remain in prison for so many years because they can't afford a lawyer. So it's important that the government and even every stakeholder, CSOs and even the judiciary, basically invest in building the capacity of everyone involved in handling these cases. And it's also important that CSOs that are handling these cases create lots of awareness. The criminal justice advisory reform, now this is a professional setting where we're talking about this, but then we can do something for specific professionals, handling these cases. I also think another thing we should look at is prioritize the implementation of other existing legislation, like the Administration of Criminal Justice Act and the Correctional Service Act. So why would someone be scared of going to pursue justice? Because the person thinks, oh, justice is slow. Now, at the ACJA, which hasn't been domesticated in all the states, but at least in majority of the states have domesticated as Administration of Criminal Justice Act, and it has so many laudable provisions. It creates room for, by virtue of ACJA, minor offenders are not supposed to go to prison. They're supposed to look into restorative justice practices and non-custodial practices. And just like that, the Correctional Service Act to also make room for custodial sentencing and non-custodial sentencing. So now what we have is the prisons are packed up with people. I've had clients who went to prison because they stole. I had a client who went to prison for stealing a cashew nut of 100 naira. Now, 100 naira, I don't know how to explain what 100 naira is right now. We just have all of those kind of issues. He actually spent, it was 2 years, he was in prison for 2 years. He wasn't tried, he was just kept there. He said his file was missing and all of that. So we have people in prison who are not supposed to be in prison. And so the place is congested. 70% of people in prison are waiting trial, while the real people who are supposed to be in prison are working scot-free. So if we need to prioritize the implementation of these legislations, because for me, I feel Nigeria has lots of good, well, we're trying, we are progressing. Yes, let me use the word progressing when it comes to legislations and all of that. Just like the VAP Act, wonderful legislation, but the issue is always with implementation. So implementation of the VAP, the Child Right Act, then all of this very recent legislation. I also think that there is a need for cultural shifts. Many times the girl child is being blamed for everything that happens to her. And then many times women in Nigeria are being groomed yes, they're being groomed for marriage, but then it is not really balanced. Many times it's not balanced in the sense that the woman is told to prepare and all of that is happening, but then lots of attention is not put on the man. And I think that this is also something we must begin to speak about. Going forward, I think we should not just stop at speaking about these issues. We're going to ask questions, we're going to share our thoughts. It's important we take action. For me, I took action when I realized that many people, half of the people in prison are not supposed to be in prison. And when I took action, I didn't even have the full picture of what I wanted to do. But then I knew it was necessary to take action. And today we are working in different custodial centers. Now, we don't do only sexual and gender-based violence issues. We actually do majorly capital cases. But then we prioritize any case that has to do with rape, we prioritize those cases. So if you have committed rape and you're awaiting trial for years, we want you to get your punishment and know how long you're spending, all of that. I hope that going from here, we would actually take action on all of the things that we've spoken today. And I think that this is a perfect time. This is the perfect time for that. There's a lot of conversation around criminal justice reform, just like Mr. Babatunde had mentioned. There's a lot of conversation around that. I think the government is also eager to do stuff with the NSAS protest. Young people, everybody is Sorosoking, right? We are not keeping quiet. We are moving. So I think this is important. We're having discussion at this time, and we can actually make progress if we put our work into action. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Funke. I mean, you've given a rundown of so much that you are involved in and highlighted the challenges that we are facing in the criminal justice system. One point you did highlight was the reluctance to domesticate a lot of the laws, especially in the northern parts of the country. And I think one thing that has I want to promote with this group is lobbying. So lobbying of those in power, for example, legislators, maybe some judges, the people who can actually, with some persuasion or whatever, actually make a difference. Because as you say, we are professionals, we speak, there's a lot of talk going on, but how if the legislators say, oh yes, they are committed to making change or implementing the law, and then for 6 months it doesn't happen. So I think we have to find a way where we can incentivize them to actually implement these laws. We might also need some religious leaders on board as well, because they are, of course, very important members of the community in terms of influence, also the traditional rulers. And also, I think that would help having them on board, because looking at the gap, like you say, there's that social gap in the one sense between agents of government like the police and the citizens. There's the gap between older members of society and younger members, a lot of cultural issues as well, and also the gap between the genders, between men and women, boys and girls, and how we interact with each other. So that goes very much really towards reform of the system. I don't think it can just be a situation of professionals trying to reform. But let me move on swiftly to the questions that have been raised. And I think the first one I have here is from Idowu. And this is addressed to Mr. Deniro. And you did mention about fundraising. And her question, or Idowu's question, is how are you raising funds? And is there any money from the state?
Yes, thank you for that question. Yes, there's money from the state. I had said that from a budgeting perspective, we had to show a number of activities planned for the violence against persons management community because it wasn't captured in the 2020 budget, but now it will be captured in the 2021 budget. But beyond that, even the family support unit was also partly funded by the state. The area command training that I went to all the police area commands and it was also funded by the state. But at the same time, we also get CSOs that fund certain activities. The preparation of the draft action plan, the state action plan of the Violence Against Persons Management Committee was basically sponsored by WADC. And so we've been creative to look for funding wherever the funding exists. As long as we have an activity, we believe there's someone who is interested enough to put money down. So as long as we look for it, I'm sure we'll always find it.
Thank you. Next question I have is, what procedures do you have in place to obtain forensic evidence from victims?
So this is an area which is less developed. Obviously, victims have privacy rights as well, so you need their consent before you can obtain any evidence from them. Particularly when they go to medical doctors in order to take the swabs or whatever is necessary, they need to sign consent. They need to basically consent to it. So that's there. And even from the suspects as well, they also have rights. They also need to consent unless they're basically you get a court order to compel them, whether it's for DNA comparison or whatever it is. But yeah, it's basically consent-based.
Yes, I mean, because forensics is very resource intensive, and you're working probably with scientific experts and sometimes medical experts as well for that. Yes, so a question from Buki Shonibare. First of all, with the challenge of longevity, slow pace of justice, I think she's saying, how would the SGBV special courts suffice? And I think in addition to that, can the special courts be an approach to dealing with the problem of courts not being able to deal with close proximity? I hope I've asked that correctly. But just to take another question on the special courts, and I think this is raised by Buki as well. Does that offend the Constitution? I think by that I mean, is there provision in our current Constitution for such a court?
Thank you very much. So, of course, when we say special or sexual offenses court or special court, what we're really referring to is a division of the High Court that focuses on that. So, for example, you can have the commercial law division of the High Court, or you can have the criminal law division of the High Court. In the same vein, you can have the sexual offenses division of the High Court. The other way of doing it is to designate a judge so every sexual offense case will go to a particular judge who is still handling other matters, but then they will prioritize sexual offenses. Whether special courts will be useful where you're talking about victims having access to courts that are within their proximity. Well, you can put special courts in every division of the High Court. And so, for example, we have 10 judicial divisions of the High Court in Ogun State. So you can have in each of those divisions a special or commercial division, sexual offenses division within the same court premises or court complex. And then, or designate judges, whichever approach works. So you would be looking in doing that, like the current chief judge is doing, actually looking at the volume of cases and the distribution across divisions. That's what will inform where she's going to set up those special courts. And then, is it the solution to delay? Yes and no. I mean, there are many issues responsible for slow pace of justice. One of them, I think, is lack of data. So, for example, I can tell you now that in Ogun State, criminal cases take on average 3 years, but land cases take 4.5 years on average. Fundamental human rights cases take less than a year, and divorce cases take a year. So depending on the type of case, there might be delay occasioned by different issues. The second aspect of it, I think, is capacity. When you look at some of the reasons responsible, because maybe someone is not focusing on what they should be doing as part of their work. Another aspect of it, I think, is because defense attorneys do not intervene early enough. One of the projects we started in Ogun State is called the Police Justice, where we're allowing defense counsel, or at least lawyers, to have access to suspects in police detention. So from that moment, they can start to advocate for the rights of suspects. So if they need to be out on bail, they'll be out on bail. If they need to basically push prosecution to file very quickly, they will do so. And I think that would help also to speed up the pace of justice. Another thing that we're doing, it's very unpopular in Nigeria, but we're doing it nonetheless. It's plea bargaining. And I think it's something that we need to incorporate into our criminal justice system in a very transparent way. And the way we're going about it is to carry along with different stakeholders, judges, prosecutors, and the defense. And in fact, just before this session, we had a plea bargaining training with Pepperdine University, and all the different stakeholders were present, where we talked about the pros and cons and trying to avoid some of the pitfalls with plea bargaining, especially given the US experience where it's used in many instances. So there are many ways of looking at the issue of delay. Special courts might allow you to at least focus, especially when you have an expert as a judge who does not need to read up on authorities because she's already familiar with those issues. That might enable her to go through cases far more quickly. But like I said, it's not a one-size-fits-all to do in order to resolve the issue.
Yes. Well, I think Ogun State is really fortunate that they have you as an AG with your background. I mean, because from what you've said and has told us so far, you are using your experience of working in this kind of specialty for quite a while. So really a question for Funke, and I think this is where your heart as the hope behind Bars Africa. How do you raise awareness on sexual assaults and prevention?
Okay, so we like I mentioned earlier, we do sexual sexual offenses and all of that, and then we do largely criminal cases, not just sexual and gender-based violence issues. So we use social media a lot. We also work with other CSOs that do this work. So we work with CSOs that work largely on sexual and gender-based violence issues.
Right. Thank you. I'm just loading up questions. Whilst I do that, I'm going to unmute Buki, if you can hear me. Buki Shunibare. Can we, Buki, hello.
Hi, good evening.
Good evening, good evening. Right, just a quick introduction. Buki Shunibare I've known quite a while. She's been an ardent supporter, I think when I first came across her with the Bring Back Our Girls campaign. You know, remember the Chibok girls who went missing, 6 years ago now? And of course, a lot more have gone missing. Since then, Buki has moved on to other things. I know she's worked with internally displaced persons all over Nigeria, but mainly in northern Nigeria. But you have some news for us about Ebonyi State. Well, what would you like to share with us about that, please?
Thank you. And thanks for organizing this. Thanks also to the speakers. So I wanted to share on what we are doing with Ebonyi State in terms of implementation of the Ebonyi State Violence Against Persons Prohibition Law. So in an effort to take the law beyond just text or beyond what is being used as reference points in court, the state thought it necessary to, develop an implementation plan that brings to life the provisions of the law, at least to the extent to which they can be actionable. So what we're doing with the Ebonyi State is to pick the VAP law and develop an implementation plan for it. And then the implementation plan has a committee that drives the implementation, including monitoring and evaluation. And I think that ties into what the Attorney General talked about in terms of the management committee. But just to make the point that it's still a work in progress. It's not yet fully done. It's also sponsored by the UN Spotlight Initiative, but more like this whole thing we say about laws, not being implemented. We can learn from states, of course, such as Ogun State and other states that are developing implementation plan and bringing a multi-sector as well as both state and non-state actors together to drive the implementation. And then there is a whole big monitoring and implementation plan where every year, what have we done, and all of that. So just to share that, and it's something that I think if we can get that done, it will be a good way, it will be a good model, so to speak, to replicate while learning, of course, from each other. Thank you.
Yes, I think that's important. And I think that was a question that actually I wanted to ask the Attorney General. I mean, for all the good work you're doing in Ogun State, including implementation, which is key. So it's not just talk. How are you able to share good practice with, say, the neighboring states? And because you by the neighboring states like Lagos, Osun, Ondo, Oyo, and because we are talking culturally, all of us similar backgrounds, similar laws, and so forth. So, is there like a regional initiative?
Yeah, so we have what we call the Southwest Attorney General Forum. We call ourselves SWAG. We meet regularly. In fact, we met 2 nights ago, and we discuss various issues. So not limited to sexual and gender-based violence. We've discussed sexual and gender-based violence also. And we do share practices. I mean, Lagos State has done a lot that we're still trying to catch up with. And Ekiti as well is actually quite, they've done quite impressive stuff. So it's not only in Ogun State, we're constantly looking to see what our neighbors are also doing in order to, to catch up. The Yobe State, you'll be amazed to know that Yobe State has 5 sexual assault referral centers, 5 in Yobe. Ogun is still struggling to have a second one. So we also see that there are states that have done more than us in certain areas. So it's an ongoing thing. You never solve this issue in one night, but constant discussion. The British Council program I talked about, where we share best practices, I'm also going to be in attendance. We're going to talk, obviously, I will learn from people who are already implementing it in their states, and I can also share my experience. So it provides the opportunity for experience sharing as well.
Right, thank you. A question from Becky Larry. How can a new NGO get access to funding and pro bono partnerships to push these conversations even further? So Funke, do you want to take this?
Okay, so yeah, thank you. One of the ways you want to do that is just start what you already doing, right? Just continue what you're doing, because many times we have a situation whereby donors want to see what you have done, and then if existing NGOs who want to partner with you, they also want to see what you've done. So for me, I just started, and then along the line, I began to apply for grants and all of that. While you might not immediately get the big grants, there are smaller grants that you could use to just carry out few projects. And as people begin to see the impact you're making with the project, it also helps to create more awareness around what you're doing. So if you could just drop your email with Babs, I could send some links to you of certain organizations I know that support the work people do around justice and criminal justice issues. I think another thing would be to look for credible organizations to partner with, send letters to them, send proposals to them. Many times, the bigger organizations will not do everything. So if you're working, for instance, around in communities, they want to partner with credible organizations, smaller organizations in communities. So just look out for organizations already doing what you're doing, and then write them and find ways to partner. That also helps to create credibility on the work you're doing. Yeah, so yeah, that's about
it. If I may just ask, I'm conscious of the time. Now, we've talked about organizations, whether the UN, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, European Union, so on and so forth. How about Nigerian foundations? Is any are you getting any support or funding from local organizations?
Okay. Yeah, the first support I got was actually from a local organization.
Right.
So they were funded by MacArthur Foundation to incubate smaller organizations. So I only put in my idea. I put in a proposal. They had a competition. I put in a proposal, and the first funding I got was from them. Many times when they see that you're actually making impact with your work, they want to partner with you. So before I got the partnership with Cornell University, I had to do some work with Nigerian organizations. Okay. And to be candid, for me, they had been quite open to partnership.
That's good, because I mean, I feel for me, the solutions to Nigerian problems has to be Nigerians ourselves, and I think there are more than a few people that can assist with funding, and I think just we are talking about lobbying as well, how we can get to, and somebody raised the question about how we can influence governors to actually look at these issues as priorities. I must say that that's a big task, because even in the UK, for example, criminal justice is not necessarily a vote winner. So you don't really get a lot of attention or funding unless maybe it's close to an election time. And then, of course, the politicians would want to show that they are tough on crime. So really, it's more towards probably more incarceration rather than talking about funding the system itself. But so that's a big conversation. But I think for a lot of the states, there is that raising awareness, is just as important as the financial backing. Right. I think I just really want to thank our speakers. First of all, Mr. Kingbolaho Adeniran, Attorney General and Commissioner for Justice of Ogun State, for giving up your time and telling us what's happening in Ogun State in this very really quite important. All criminal offenses do have an impact, but of course, sexual offenses, I think, are one of the most heinous crimes, and it's important that we know what is happening. But I'm impressed again that you as a public servant, you are willing to share with us what you are doing, because I think accountability is very important. Thank you very much, Funke, for highlighting the issues that are faced by defense counsel, and especially someone as yourself who is actually specialized in criminal law and procedure, because unlike in the UK, where we have specialist prosecutors, specialist defense counsel, that is not necessarily the case in Nigeria. I don't think it's because people don't want to do criminal law. I think it's a funding issue. Funding for defense solicitors and barristers, legal executives, is also an issue, I think, in what we call the so-called advanced countries. But also the work that you do, pro bono, the raising awareness, the CSO, I mean, your passion does come out so fully. Thank you to Buki for your contribution, and to those who have sent in questions. Apologies if I did not put all the questions that were asked, but I hope you have all got an idea of what's happening with criminal justice from our two speakers. The next session is going to be the first Friday in February, which I believe is the 4th of February. I will send details round and speakers. And in fact, I would want to speak to a few of you before then about speakers. My focus, really, I would like to get the people at the coalface like the attorneys general, those in the legislative bodies, and so forth, senior police officers, and maybe judges if they're allowed to speak. Topics that I'll be wanting to look at, like we say, the issue of children and young persons in the criminal justice system, mentally ill defendants, the issue of non-custodial sentences, and even sentencing guidelines. I think when Funke spoke about minor theft, what is the appropriate sentence for minor theft as opposed to someone who steals billions of naira. So that really brings an end to today's session. I hope you have all found it useful. Thank you very much, everyone, for giving up Friday evening, whether you're in Nigeria, in the UK, all parts of the world, including the Caribbean. Thank you so much, and I wish you all a safe December and Christmas, and that we all meet again in the new year.